Today we're talking to Australian author and international speaker Andrew Matthews. Andrew's books, including Being Happy, Follow Your Heart and Bouncing Back, have sold over 8 million copies in 48 languages. Andrew has presented to over 1,000 corporations on 5 continents on attitude, enjoying work and resilience. Andrew also speaks in universities and prisons.
Perfect. Prisons, I want to learn about that.
That's a whole other story. So I guess probably, starting off, do you want to take us back to the beginning? So, where first career and where that took you?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my father was a landscape painter, so I grew up loving drawing and painting. Yeah. But I thought the responsible thing was to become a lawyer first. So I began a law degree at Adelaide University, and that lasted nearly 6 months. And then I thought, I'm going to go and do what I really love to do. And I knew about 2 art teachers in America at the Art Students League of New York who taught figure drawing and portrait painting, which is what I loved. Oh, wow. So I went off there at age 19 and I studied classical drawing and painting. And I was painting portraits into my 20s, and I was teaching art and not as happy as I thought I should have been. And at age 25, I made this shocking discovery. I discovered that the happiest people I knew had bigger problems than me. And suddenly I had no excuse. I'd grown up in a loving family. I was healthy, and yet I was someone who complained too much. I probably blamed circumstances too much. Yeah. And I wasn't as happy as I thought I would end up. I had this picture that my life is going to work out. And now I had no excuse. I realised that often it was people who had come through cancer, or they'd gone broke, or they'd lost loved ones, or I came across one family, their house had burned down, and they were like the happiest family I ever met. I thought, this makes no sense. And so began this quest of mine to find out how happy people think, so that I could perhaps begin to think like them. Yeah. And I read about 200 books. Some were pretty boring. None of them had cartoons. And after 3 years of talking to happy people and unhappy people and reading and going to workshops, I thought, I want to write the book about happiness that I wish I had had in the beginning. Mm. And so I wrote this book, Being Happy, and with much excitement and enthusiasm, sent it off to publishers, and the first 17 publishers said no. Wow. But publisher number 18 said, we like it and we want even more cartoons in your book. And their previous publication was the Vanuatu telephone directory.
So is that a compliment?
So they didn't have a huge track record either, but they had a sense that a book. Here's the thing. Very few people are comfortable walking into bookshops, and not that many people read books. Mm. But a lot of people love to read magazines. Mm. And so they thought, we want this book, Being Happy, to feel more friendly, like a magazine, with simple language, cartoons, a bit of white space, headings so that you can see where you want to dip into or what you want to read later. And with the cartoons and this was one of the first books on, this is 1988. Yeah. So there were no books about happiness. There were no books with cartoons in them on self-help. So after a slow start, things began to catch fire around the world, and that little book, Being Happy, sold 3 million copies.
Far out.
Incredible.
Especially off your first book as well. Like that.
Yes. Well, my first book, but not my first manuscript. My first manuscript. That's a success story. I'd heard it can be difficult to get published, so I had this strategy. I thought, I will get the addresses of the 60 most likely publishers all over the world for this, my first children's book that I'd written. And I'm not going to send out one manuscript at a time. I'll send out 60. and like at least 3 are going to like it, or 5, and then I will choose who I want. And after about 2 weeks, the rejections started coming back, 10, 15, 27, 39, 41, 57, 58, 59, 60. 61. Somebody wrote to me twice. Oh, no. Said, forget it. So, but what I understood from that was that you've just got to stay persistent.
Yeah. What was that process like? Obviously, we've got bouncing back in front of us. You've got something you've spent potentially weeks, months, years on. It's like your creative passion. You've poured everything into it, and sending it off to 60 different people and having them reject it. What kind of gets you back on the horse to keep trying to get it?
The big thing for me about being happy, my second manuscript, but what became my first book, was I thought that this is a book that everyday people are going to benefit from. I thought if I got to the age of 25 and there was some really important stuff that I missed, then back when I wrote Being Happy, the people that were reading self-help books were mainly like insurance salesmen. But I thought, if I can write the right kind of book about just living a happier life and feeling better about ourselves and liking ourselves a bit more, and about why maybe it helps to set some goals and why that makes us feel more in control of our life, and living a little bit more in the present, dealing with some of those things, then I could reach a student or a mother or some guy that works in a post office. Not your average self-help, I'm going to be a billionaire kind of reader.
Especially for that time.
But everyday people who just want to be a bit happier. And it turned out to be, that it worked.
Yeah.
So the extraordinary thing is that I get emails and messages on social media every day still about being happy and about other books. Bouncing Back, Follow Your Heart, Happiness in Hard Times. But so the joy for me is that someone will take the trouble to say, hey, I read your book and I feel better about myself, or, I get the most extraordinary messages.
What do you think the difference is, though, looking back? Because being 25 and probably not having the vision of how many millions of people you've impacted at this point, what does that sort of mean to you now that you've gotten to this stage in your life?
I feel so incredibly blessed.
Yeah.
And the greatest joy for me is in getting a letter from a kid in Vietnam who said, I used to hate myself and I was doing badly at school, and I read your book, Being a Happy Teenager, and now I'm happy every day of my life and I'm doing so much better. And sometimes they will say things like, which is not true, you changed my life. I didn't. But sometimes, and this is the important thing, one idea can change your life. An example, it's not failure that crushes us. What hurts most is never having tried. So that's something that I said in my last book, Bouncing Back. If you get a hold of that idea, that will change your entire life trajectory.
Yeah.
Or if you read somewhere else, be kind to people, because not only are you happier, but you will create connections, some of which will last a lifetime. If you say, that is how I'm going to live from today, it was one idea in a book, but it changes your whole trajectory. So I write these books with the idea that somewhere there might be a paragraph or a cartoon. I've got a cartoon in Bouncing Back, and there's a guy climbing a mountain, and he looks totally exhausted, and his dog is sweating. And the caption is simply, what you thought was breaking you is probably making you. In other words, this shit thing that you're going through may be preparing you for something and for success that you never imagined. And that is usually how life works. But if we've got a cartoon that we can see, okay, some other guy went through that, and him in this cartoon, then we might even hang that in our imagination or hang it on our wall and say, this difficult time that I'm going through where I didn't get that promotion, or I failed that course, or my girlfriend just dumped me and said I'm a loser. If we say, what I thought was breaking me is probably making me. And in Bouncing Back, I talk about my wife, Julie, who lost her mother when she was 10 years old. At age 8, she was caring for her brothers and sisters. At age 8, she was taking her mother to hospital like every week or two because she was so sick. And yet Julie evolved into this force of nature. Julie is my publisher. She's the reason we're in 48 languages.
Wow.
She just said, Andrew, we're going global with this. So Julie became my publisher in 1995, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I watch what she has been through, and she would be the first to say it was the hardest thing losing my mother when I was just a little girl, and I'd come home and there was no one to talk to. But it's what turned her into this extraordinary, unstoppable 4'11" person.
Force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, scared of nobody, not even me.
No, I love that.
I think that's such like an interesting part, is that so many of these lessons throughout your books are things that we talked about so many times, but they're also like lessons that everyone sort of goes through in different ways, I find. So I guess looking back on all these different lessons that you've picked up, do you feel like you've figured out what that key to happiness was that you were looking for at age 25, or do you feel like you have a better perspective on that?
If there's lots of things I talk about, and I struggle with, when things go wrong, I get let down, I get frustrated.
Yeah.
And I've had my wife say to me, you write these books. But here's the thing, it's not that we're going to be leaping about 24 hours a day, ecstatic. The key thing is, and I guess I wrote a book about it, is that we bounce back. Yeah. And so if there is one central principle to having a happier life, it's gratitude. Happy people focus on what they have, and unhappy people focus on what's missing. A part of it is bringing ourselves back to the present moment and not always figuring that the next moment is going to be better than this one. For example, we might look forward to a dinner date that's happening next Friday, and we say, well, I'm going to be, this is a crappy week, I'm going to be happy then. And then Friday evening comes and we jump in our car and suddenly we're stuck in traffic. And now we're running late. This damn traffic, I'll be happy when I get to the restaurant. And now we get to the restaurant late and there's already a line-up, so we're waiting for our table and we're saying, I'll be happy when I get my table and also when my date shows up. So, and then I'll be happy when I get the menu. I'll be happy when they take my order.
Delayed happiness.
Yeah. I'll be happy when my meal comes and then we take a shot of it and we put it on Instagram. I'll be happy when someone else likes my chicken, And we're always postponing for the next moment. Yeah. And the next moment is never going to be better than this moment. Yeah. And the trouble is, when the next moment comes, you won't be in it.
It's so interesting you say that, because I've heard I've seen people's TikTok videos and on Instagram of saying that always plan something ahead to look forward to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's younger people's perception of how to make sure you always have something coming up that you're looking forward to.
Book holidays.
Book holidays. Make sure you got a holiday book or something to look forward to, so you're not just being dragged down into your everyday life sort of thing.
Well, I believe that too.
Yeah.
So I think, in the back of your mind, you want to have those things that you're looking forward to. So if you're having coffee with an old friend every Tuesday, then that's one thing that you say, and let's say you're going to your favourite dance class every Friday, then you're never more than 3 days away from something that's going to give you joy.
Yeah.
So in the back of your mind, you're saying, this is a joyful life I have, because this is what's part of my weekly routine. Yeah. At the same time, we can be in a situation where we're just always saying it's going to be better when I get dessert. You haven't even had your soup yet.
Yeah. It's about having that self-awareness as well too, and having the tools to be able to, kind of realize that you're in the moment when you just kind of keep getting, in the role of, I'll enjoy this when it comes, I'll enjoy it, but just to be able to like snap, like, things are good at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably a practice thing. And one of the reasons I talk about these things is I need to learn it more than anyone else. and so we can be continually reminding ourselves, hey, bring yourself back to the present moment. I've even heard it described like we live like we say, I want this glass of water. And even when I'm bringing this water to my lips, I'm thinking about when I'm going to be drinking it. And when I'm drinking it, I'm thinking about putting it back on the table. I miss the water.
Yeah. I'm so thirsty right now.
I think it's really nice to hear the reinforcement, because the topic of happiness, if you can even call it a topic, was the first thing we covered off on this podcast well over a year ago. We thought, what is the foundation of self-development, self-help? What are we trying to work towards? And I think what we distilled it down to was happiness, and it became the topic of our first thing. You've been in this self-help, if you can call it self-help, self-development, personal growth game for well over 30 years. Being Happy was released in 88, something like that. Through that time, we've seen the advent of podcasts and the self-help books, and now a billion-dollar industry. How were you such an early adopter of it, or was it an industry back then? And then how have those, I suppose, principles changed now, or do you see it differently, or do the same principles still apply 30 years on?
It's tougher being in this space now.
Okay,
Someone's starting in this space because the publishing industry, these days, everyone is a photographer. Everyone can go on Amazon and have an ebook up within 45 minutes. And so there's a lot of white noise around there. And now everybody can promote their product with a podcast or regular YouTube videos. So there's way more competition for those people who are saying, I've got a message to share. When my books came out, it was very tough to find a publisher, but there were almost no books on being happy. I remember when the second book came out that had happiness in the title, and someone said to me, this is bad news for you. There's another book on happiness. and now there's like hundreds and hundreds. And I don't think the principles change, but sometimes, for example, we don't even need to be told new information. We just need to be reminded about things we already know. So in a sense, a lot of what I do with my books is reinforce for people things they already know. I was listening to a YouTube video the other day that was just talking about living in the now and how all your power is in the present moment, and that the people that you attract and the opportunities that you create are not based around the person you're going to be, but about how you feel now and what you feel about yourself. I've been talking about that. I wrote a whole book on it called How Life Works, but it was really helpful for me to be reminded about something I already know. So what I like to do is have very simple examples and very simple stories and cartoons and tell real stories. In Bouncing Back, I've got, I think there's about 60 stories of people who went through extraordinary hardship, loss. Someone said to me, so those stories, are they real? Of course they're real, I mean, the stories of resilient people are everywhere, and it's so helpful to get some perspective that our own problems are not that big.
Yeah, I think it's pretty illustrated well. I'm sure you would have read Eddie Jacqu's Happiest Man on Earth, and it wasn't a book on self-help or self-development or a book on happiness. It's a man's struggle through like the Holocaust. Yet somehow all the atrocities he went through, he's still come out happier than probably 99% of people on Earth, and that's that resilience story
yes.
you're speaking to.
Yes, and helps us to understand that it's not what happens to you, it's how you think about what happens to you. And that was probably the first thing that got me at age 25, that these happy people, the people that I see around me that have some kind of direction and purpose and joy and meaning in their life, have mostly overcome really challenging circumstances.
Yeah. Would you say that, like adding to what Ben sort of mentioned, do you think the increase for self-help and self-development and so many people getting into it is because so many more people feel lost, or it's just they have more self-awareness now to actually try and find out these details and try and live a better life?
I think 30 years ago, as a mass, people were not so inclined to go looking for self-help.
Yeah.
Now it's a very established genre.
Yeah.
You know, if we go back to 40 years ago, there were books like How to Win Friends and Influence People and The Power of Positive Thinking and Think and Grow Rich and a couple of others that people would think of. So now I think people are much more likely to go looking for a book or a YouTube video than they would have been looking for outside help 30 years ago. The key is also for me that you need to have a simple message. When I write my books, I imagine that my reader is 12 years old.
Yeah.
It's not that all of my readers are 12 years old. I get emails from brain surgeons and I get emails from CEOs, and so a lot of different people read them, but nobody wants to have to read a sentence twice.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever written to me and said, I like your books, but if only you had used bigger words.
Yeah.
People remember simple stuff. You think of the movie lines that stick in your head. It's, I'll have what she's having. I'll be back. Show me the money.
Yeah.
People want that sort of language in a book. Yeah. If the language in your book is that simple and easy to remember, and it's got cartoons in it as well, then you have something that is likely to stay with you and stick a little bit.
Yeah.
So as you're talking about like industries changing and things evolving, over the last 20, 30 years, like you obviously been, a classically trained artist, and we're seeing different things come into the industry like the, graphic design, generative AI and things like that, and that space is changing. Have you seen just like that barrier to entry to get into the industry kind of change? So, you might spend, weeks, months doing these cartoons and doing them all by hand, whereas someone could potentially just, jump on the computer and generate them now?
I haven't experimented with graphic AI because I don't want to.
Yeah.
So just for the hell of it, I have played around a little bit with AI generating text and that sort of thing, just to see how well it can write, and I think we've all done that. I believe that at this point, somebody with a quirky personality and intelligence and enthusiasm and a real person is still going to write way better than AI can write.
Yeah.
And I still believe that I can introduce subtleties to a cartoon and 1,000 different considerations, each with a reason that are going to create a better cartoon than AI is going to create. Now, where that's going to be in 10 years' time, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just spent the best part of the last week creating the cover for my new teen book, Being a Happy Teen, where I've got 7 teens on the cover just enthusiastically taking a selfie.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest little illustrations I've ever done, I think it's going to work. But there are so many things that I will do as an artist where I'll change the colour of, I worked from a few photographs and I had some sketches and I saw some videos and put this whole thing together. But I made decisions about what I was going to do with one person's expression, and one person was changed from white to being a black person, and then one person I swapped their T-shirts so that the person in the front would come forward in the photo and the person at the back in the illustration, person at the back recedes. A whole lot of things that I don't think AI is going to be thinking quite like an artist yet.
Yeah.
But I might be surprised in a few years.
It might speed up really fast. Yeah.
I love that. And then as well, so you've got, two really interesting elements to obviously your professional career and where you've taken. You've got the artistry and writing the books, but also like the public speaking side of things.
Yes.
Has that been a hurdle that you've had to overcome, speaking in front of big rooms, or is it something you've always felt comfortable with?
It was something I eased into.
Yeah.
I was in student government in high school.
Yeah.
And then I was an exchange student in America for a year, so I had to speak to groups. And I think I was reasonably comfortable in front of people speaking, and that's why some of my friends and relatives said, be a lawyer. But the difference, I think the biggest difference is not surviving in front of a crowd. The big transition for me was going from a position where I was speaking for nothing and just had to survive to where I'm paid to speak.
Yeah.
And so what happens when you're paid to speak is very often you'll be given a plane ticket and they will fly you to Singapore or London or Tokyo, and they're paying for your hotel accommodation. And they're thinking, before we even pay this guy, we spend thousands, and they're really expecting you to perform and elevate the audience.
You've got that pressure on you then.
So that's the real pressure. But I've been speaking. It was my wife that got me my first speaking job.
Oh wow!
And I'd given like 300 free talks in companies, Singapore, Malaysia, America, all over. And I came home one day and she said, I got your paid speaking job today. This is like 1989.
Yeah.
I said, oh, yeah, that's great. I said, what are we getting? She said, 2,500. I nearly fell over. 'Cause, Julie doesn't think small. When she said, we're taking your books to the world, she meant it. And that was my first paid speaking job 30 years ago.
Far out.
And it just blew my mind. And it was speaking to some direct marketing people in Perth, and I got the plane ticket and that sort of thing. So, but it's a wonderful thing to speak to a group, to leave an audience of it may be as few as 50 or 100. Sometimes it's 10,000. And to leave those people feeling more elevated and more positive about their life than when they went in, and to entertain them and have them laugh. I draw cartoons when I speak.
While speaking,
so I actually start my presentations, I draw a cartoon. It's a bit like taking a dog on stage or something. People get something they weren't expecting.
Yeah, it's like completely different to everyone else just coming up.
Yeah.
I love that. So with the whole speaking thing and the self-help thing, I'm just like thinking like Tony Robbins and all of those kind of like pioneers in the industry. It's obviously a passion for you, the illustration and writing about these concepts. A lot of the things we talk about on this podcast is guests who have a passion and then turning it into a business.
Yes.
Now, you've probably seen, it's almost like a copy-paste with Tony Robbins and all these other speakers on the circuit. They release books, podcasts, webinars and everything like that. Did you ever grapple with that issue of, well, I love doing all this stuff and helping people, but I also have to turn it into a business? Did you ever look to those guys and go, I don't want to sell out to that level, or I just want to do it to a level where I'm still sending a message but still putting food on the table?
I'm unlike a lot of people in that my father, being a professional artist, he was also a real estate developer in a small way, but did it because he loved it. he just did stuff he wanted to do. And when he wasn't doing that, he'd go fishing. But he was a wonderful guy. He was great fun, and he was very disciplined. He was in the Navy in the Second World War, and he'd come from a disciplined family background. So he was very focused. So he painted almost every day of his life. He would say to me, even if I'm not inspired, I can learn something. So I grew up believing that it was perfectly possible for you to do what you loved.
Yeah.
And so when I thought I'm not going to love law, I quit. And he said, great. So unlike a lot of people who have to fight their parents and their relatives and their friends saying it'll never work, I came from a totally different mindset, which was, and I also had 2 or 3 of my closest friends that were professional artists that were making a very good living.
Yeah.
So I never had any doubt that I would just spend my life doing what I loved. And whether I'd make a lot or whether I'd make enough to live, I was fairly confident of doing that. The big question for me was when I got interested in self-help was I thought, should I be an artist because I still like that, or should I do self-help things?
Yeah.
And I was actually doing seminars before I wrote Being Happy. And then one day it just clicked, why don't I do both? Why don't I put cartoons in these books that I might write?
Yeah.
So I don't know why it took me 2 years to figure that out.
That's right, the penny dropped. We're here now.
Yeah. And it was basically because no one else was doing it. You think, who puts cartoons in a self-help book?
Yeah.
And then I was blessed that as Being Happy began to get traction around the world, I started to get invited into schools and into corporations and prisons, and so the whole thing developed in parallel, and the books generated speaking engagements, and then speaking engagements would promote book sales. And so it was just something that just fed off each other.
So are you an artist in Illustrator that just put words around your drawings, or were you an author that put, drawings around your words?
If someone said you can never write another word for the rest of your life, or you can never draw a picture for the rest of your life, I'd probably say, I want to draw pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
But at the same time, the fascination for me is how an idea can change your whole life. How a simple shift in attitude can change how happy you are today and change then the people that you meet tomorrow and affect the job that you apply for next week and the house that you buy in a year and the children that you absolutely. And so that is, I mean, I get the most extraordinary stories. I got a woman sent me a message on Facebook, Umi, and she said, I was sick and I was $100,000 in debt. And I went to see my doctor. And on the table of my doctor's waiting rooms was your book, Being Happy. And she said, I read the first 7 pages before I got invited in to see the doctor. And she said, I had to read that book. So she said, I borrowed the $20 because she's $100,000 in debt. I borrowed the $20 and suddenly I felt different about me and about what I could do. And I saw an ad on Facebook of someone who wanted to cook them 10 serves of chicken rice. This is Singapore, right? So she said, I'll cook that chicken rice. And she said, I bought the ingredients. It cost me $50 and I got 30 back. So she made a loss of $20. But she said, I was on my way and I started cooking in the little kitchen of our tiny apartment. And she said, today I have a restaurant and I have a bakery and I have a food supply company. And she said, I have a multi-million-dollar business.
That's crazy.
And so next time you're in Singapore, go to Nush Noodle Bar on the Singapore Esplanade. Just, the big entertainment spaces right on the Esplanade there. They look like a durian. They're kind of round-looking things. Nestled underneath that is her Nush Noodle Bar.
Yeah.
Wonderful food.
Oh,
and tell Umi I sent you.
Yeah, 100%. So what would you say are like some of the key ideas? Because you said ideas are what spread, and ideas are sort of like how you have been able to help so many millions of people. What are some of those key ideas? Like if you had to boil it down, maybe even just like 3 or 5 that you'd probably give, maybe even back to that 25-year-old version of yourself.
Okay, let's talk about 3 key ideas from bouncing back, for example, because we're all trying to bounce back from something, eating too much, spending too much, a job we thought we might have got but we didn't. So 3 keys to bouncing back. Number 1 is acceptance. There's a myth that says if you in a situation that you don't like and if you don't accept it, you won't be stuck with it. No, that's wrong. As long as you don't accept something, you're stuck with it. And as soon as you say, I wouldn't have chosen this and I don't especially like it, but this is what I've got and now I move on. That acceptance of saying, these are the parents I have, this is the job I've got at the moment, this is the body I've got, and it's okay. It's not what I wanted, but this is my starting point.
Accepting that situation.
Getting away from that, blaming your parents, blaming God, blaming I don't know what else, or just being unhappy and miserable. We had a fellow write to us who was abused in his church as a young fellow, and he said, I'm now 40, I've been reading books for over 20 years, trying to make my life better. And he said, the first page in your book, Happiness in Hard Times, where you started the entire book saying, you begin with acceptance. He said, that changed my life. And he said, why have I been reading books for 20 years and no one ever talked about the power of acceptance? So that's number 1. Number 2 is living life one day at a time, in terms of being happy, but also in terms of dealing with those massive challenges that we all have from time to time. You just say, I will do my best until bedtime, and when tomorrow comes, I'll take care of it. Turia Pitt, the lady who got so horrifically burned in that long-distance race, she talked about that. She said, when life gets too tough, and she said, when I got so badly burned in that fire accident and I couldn't even wipe my bum. She said I couldn't even bend my elbow to drink a glass of water. When it was so bad, she said, okay, I'm not even going to worry about dealing with the whole day. Can I deal with the next 5 minutes? So dealing with what's in front of us, I think, is really important. And at the same time, number 3 is having a vision for the better life that you want. We don't become better people by focusing on who we are. We become better people by focusing on who we want to be and how we want to be and the life we want to have, and seeing ourselves as being increasingly happier and more confident and more kind. And so those 3 things, acceptance of where we are, dealing with life one day at a time, and then having a vision for a better life.
Love that.
So would you say that those key fundamentals and principles are a reflection of your own life philosophy that you've just put out into the world?
It was how my life philosophy evolved as I saw people who were doing it better than me.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I've been so inspired by so many people who have managed their life from very difficult circumstances way better than me. I'll tell you a story. I was in a shopping mall in Kuala Lumpur in 2013, and I was just sort of outside. My wife was in a jewellery shop, so I thought my best place I can be is outside the jewellery shop. He comes by and he says, "Are you Andrew Matthews?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My name's Teku." He said, "I read the Indonesian version of your book when I was in university." And tears started to well up in his eyes. And so I thought, this Teku fella, he's got a story. So there's a Starbucks 2 floors up in that shopping centre. I said, "Let's go have a coffee."
Oh, well.
So he explained to me, he said, "I'm from Aceh in Indonesia." He said, "I was so poor in university that I had a pair of trousers. I didn't even have a shirt." He said, "I used to wear my girlfriend's shirt. That's all I had." And he said, I would go sometimes a day without eating. And he said, when I was at my lowest point, somebody gave me the Indonesian version of your book, Being Happy. And he said, it was the first book I'd ever read apart from a textbook. And he said, I got 2 things from that. He said, number 1, I learned that I can choose my thoughts. And he said, number 2, he said, I learned that I can set some goals, and if I set goals, then I will be feeling better about myself and headed somewhere that I want to be. So he said, I wrote these goals on a card. He said, I want to have a degree. I want to travel with the job I get. I want to have a wife and 2 children who get a good education, and I want to own a car. And he said, and now tears are coming down his face, he says, today I'm the Asian business manager of an international corporation. He said, I fly around the world business class. He said, I have a beautiful apartment in Kuala Lumpur. I have a beautiful wife and 2 children. And he said, your book changed my life. And I said, Teku, my book didn't change your life, but I'm glad you read it. Mm. So we stayed in touch.
Yeah.
About a year later, I'm in the One World Hotel in Kuala Lumpur. I've got his number now, so I call him up. I say, I'm having breakfast in the One World Hotel. I said, where are you? He said, I work in the office building next door. I'll see you in 5 minutes. So he came over and we had a chat. And he said, I've been offered a promotion to be world manager in Dubai. He said, I'm not sure if I'm going to take it. Mm. It depends on my wife and my girls, whether they want to go or not. So anyway, November 2016, I'm headed to Dubai. I call him up. I say, I'm coming to Dubai. I'm going to be there on the 16th. Can we have dinner? So bear in mind, this is the guy that didn't even own a shirt.
Yeah.
He says to me, I've got business meetings in Boston and New York on the 16th. But he said, if you can come a day early, we can do dinner. So I went a day early and had dinner with his wife and beautiful girls. His wife is the girlfriend who used to loan him a shirt to go to university. Since then, he's had 3 promotions and been headhunted, was working in Houston, back in Kuala Lumpur. We had breakfast in Kuala Lumpur a year ago. Since then, he's been headhunted. I think he's in Houston, Texas now. He is an absolute giant killer. He's when we talk about is my philosophy, I get inspired by him. Mm-hmm. He runs, I see him, I give him a hug, and his body is like, so strong. Mm. He works out every morning. He spends time with his 2 girls who are just killing it now in university, both of them very bright.
Yeah.
To watch how he has made something of, his life. And when he talks about his life, he is most excited. This is what I love. He's most excited about talking about his wife and his 2 daughters. Mm. Doesn't talk about the fact that he's now one of the, captains of industry. Mm. No.
Far out. That's inspiring.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just fill your cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the amount of stories that there's probably out there, like you said, you're pulling this inspiration from so many other people's stories, and I guess then in turn, like, you've reminded people how to unlock that in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I hope to do that, and I hope that people perhaps pick up a book and they say, well, this this guy's a cartoonist, he writes pretty simply, maybe he's a bit like me.
Yeah.
And sometimes just one little story or one little cartoon that we can hold in our head can help.
Have you seen your motivation change over the last 30, 40 years from when you're 25, wake up every day to do what you loved versus when you wake up every day now to do it?
Basically, no.
No, still the same.
Because there's a wonderful thing about either sitting down at a laptop and saying, I want to write a paragraph that is going to reach people and perhaps amuse them and inspire them, or I want to create a cartoon that has a strong message that is going to stick in their head. And it's like you guys know, because you do stuff on social media. It's the thing very often that you think is not the best.
Yeah.
But you're too close to it, so you don't know. I remember back in 2014, I'd just gone onto Facebook, and I was about to get on. I was in Singapore. I was about to get on a plane. I had a half an hour to sketch a cartoon that I had in my head, and it was of this theme of happy people focus on what they have. So I had a guy with one slice of cake looking very happy, and unhappy people focus on what's missing. And I had a fatter guy with a whole cake minus one slice.
Yeah.
So he's got 9 times as much as what the other guy's got. And he's looking at the missing slice, looking very unhappy.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's not even funny, but I guess I'll post it.
Yeah.
And when I next looked at my Facebook feed, it had like 2.5 million views and 63,000 likes.
What?
And so I thought, this Facebook really works. I mean, never worked like that again. But
to be fair, it only has to work like that once, I guess.
yeah, well, yeah, it was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
But the thing is, people who perhaps embrace that cartoon, they said to themselves, I know this. This is just a reminder. Yeah. But it's fun to create a picture, a cartoon, a paragraph that may uplift someone or change their day.
Do you see the feedback that you're getting from people, especially over the time that you've been releasing your work, their motivation for getting into just that space change? So what potentially was, as we've described it, maybe self-help that time ago, whereas now is perceived as like self-improvement or self-development. Have you seen, as that space change, people's motivations for getting into it different, or it's all kind of individual to the person?
I think it's probably individual to the person. Yeah. Very often, people don't even want to pick up my books. I often will get emails. I got an email from a lady in Proserpine in Queensland, and she said, my husband, who never reads, picked your book up from the coffee table and he's been quoting you ever since. And so it comes back to, if you can create a post or a video or something that says this doesn't have to be complex or complicated. And it's also important for me as a creator of the information that I can let people know I'm just like them, you know. I struggle with the same stuff you struggle with.
Yeah.
And I find these ideas help me. And so people think, well, okay, I'm prepared to look at that. If the books are simple and if the cartoons make them fun, and if other people are getting some benefit, but very often it's just because they just opened one page or saw one little video on YouTube or Instagram.
I think one of the biggest ones that I feel like a lot of potentially like our generation, I know we're not like the young generation going through high school or anything, but I think a lot of my friends, even myself, definitely struggle with feeling like you're either behind in life or you need to have everything figured out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's probably a common concept through generations too, is like feeling like you have to have everything figured out when you're coming up.
I think that's another one of the really big reasons for why a lot of people in these generations do get into self-improvement, self-development, because it's so closely tied to success, and most people that have achieved success have likened it to being into self-development, things like that. And I think it can almost get a little bit conflated and lost in people's motivation. Instead of wanting to improve themselves and be the best version of themselves, they see it as like a necessary tool to have in their arsenal to be successful.
Okay, so I'll do this. So
very
it'll
true.
make me. Yeah, that's an interesting way to see it.
Or people feel like they want direction as well.
Yeah.
Some sort of direction.
I like a phrase a fellow called James Rohn used to say. Life gets better when you get better.
I know it's interesting. I just think, and that's why I was kind of tying it back into the reasons you've had people get back to you of their motivation of wanting to get into that space.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
What do you think of that? Like, if so many young people feel like they need to have it all figured out or feel like they're behind, especially like you said, social media is so prevalent. We're all so connected, looking at what everyone else is achieving. How do we sort of, I guess, still utilize things like social media, but then also not get bogged down in feeling like we're behind or comparing ourselves to other people?
When we're really struggling, one of the best starting points is coming back to gratitude and coming back to saying, what do I love about today? What do I love about my friends? What do I love about where I live? What do I love about living in this town? What do I love about the food that I can eat? What do I... Even the smallest things, when gratitude always brings us back to the present moment, and it can sound like a bit cliche, but the thing is it works. The thing is it brings us back to dealing with today and the people that we're with, and so. The thing about social media is very often it's presenting us this is what they've got that you haven't got, or this is what I'm pretending more often this is what I'm pretending I've got that you haven't got. And, everyone's looking really happy, but they actually took 30 photographs before they could get everyone smiling, and then they filtered it and did the whole thing, and you get a totally different picture. Yeah, I'm thinking that gratitude is the starting point.
And what's that look like, practicing gratitude for yourself?
For me, it looks like I've got a space in my diary where I will write down 3 things every day when I get up, 3 things I'm happy with. Yeah. And so that starts me thinking about what I've got.
That's
really cool.
I love that.
And a lot of people, there are heaps of phone apps out there. I don't use one for gratitude. They'll remind you and they'll give you a space to write it down, and then you can go scroll back through it and see what you were grateful for this time last year, and all kinds of hard copy journals and things that you can do as well. But writing down 3 things before anything.
Sometimes it just needs to be simple. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Hey?
Well, the thing, Cam, is we notice. Here's what we notice about really happy people. They get excited about little stuff.
Yeah.
It's unhappy people that think, well, a Ferrari's going to make me happy. But really happy people will celebrate a 10-minute conversation with a friend they just had.
Or getting 5 green lights on the way to work. Something so simple.
Yeah. So the more that we get into the habit of listing and celebrating little things rather than big things, the more that we are beginning to think like the happiest people we know. So it's not about finding big things to be happy about, although that can work too. Like
celebrating the small wins, enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
I love that.
So we're coming towards the end of the year now. What's anything you're wrapping up before the end of the year, and anything exciting you've got planned within the next 12 months?
We're launching Bouncing Back in Australia. Bouncing Back is in India and Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, but not in Australia, New Zealand, or the UK yet.
Yeah.
So we're launching in January in Australia.
Is that the physical copy or
Physical
just,
copy? Yeah. Bouncing Back is already on. It's on Amazon everywhere. And the Audible version's on Amazon, and the ebook and the. Yeah.
Do you ever go like off track as well, like while reading it out?
I do. I describe some of the cartoons. I say what you can't see on this Audible.
Well, fun fact.
Yeah. So I do that. I do that with the cartoons that I can describe. There's a little guy in a boat and he's fishing, and
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Is there anything else you want to share before I guess we wrap up today? Like any gems, anything that you want to plug as well, other than Bouncing Back?
What I'd like to share with everyone, firstly, is if you think that some of what I've said has made sense, my books are available on Amazon in ebook and hard copy. So you'll find, for example, Being Happy, Follow Your Heart, Bouncing Back.
Linked in the description notes
Great.
as well too.
Yeah.
So, I guess in terms of being happy and in terms of what we all want, it's just if we can live one day at a time, if we can just make the most of today, and then when tomorrow comes, we say, this is my day, and I'm going to look for good things because I find what I look for. And we just add one good day to the next good day, we end up having that happy life.
Amazing.
Wow. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, mate.